who is a citizen in South Africa? What does it take to qualify to be a citizen? And are there gaps in the system of the legislation in South Africa or gaps in the Department of Home Affairs?
There's a big fight now going on around can these foreigners claim from the road accident fund. Issue of citizenship comes in, and the issue of xenophobia.
We need to talk to what is the criteria to become a citizen in South Africa.
So there's three ways to obtain citizenship in South Africa. So if we look at the issue around the Miss South African contestant, everything might seem above board, but it's very difficult to ascertain whether her parents were in the country legally and if they were actually South African. What's going on at Home Affairs? Is there corruption? So that's where the problem comes in.
Hi, I'm Terrence Kommal, and I have the great pleasure of speaking to attorney Gustav Snyman on what is a very contentious issue at the moment in South Africa. What one thought was settled law and clear in terms of the various legislation has now become a very contentious media issue after the latest elections in South Africa and the government of national unity. What is concerning centers around a key topic of who is a citizen in South Africa, what does it take to qualify to be a citizen? And are there gaps in the system of the legislation in South Africa or gaps in the Department of Home Affairs that directly impacts the legality of those who purport to be citizens as opposed to those who are validly done? Gustav, thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Terrence. I'm an attorney at Steenkamp and Spies Inc. Here in Ferry Glen, and we specialize in road accident fund claims. And that gives us a broad overview of clients' needs, and especially foreigner clients that want to claim, and it gives us insight into what these clients deal with every day in regard to their asylum applications and citizenship, and the whole basis around if they can claim or not, as there's a big fight now going on around can these foreigners claim from the road accident fund.
Yes.
And this is where the whole issue of citizenship comes in, and the issue of xenophobia, as parties during the recent elections have used that point as a big election booster to get votes and to win votes, because South Africans feel that they have been pushed aside and placed in an inferior position to foreigners who are willing to work for less wages and who will do any work just to get a better opportunity for a better life.
But that's when you talk to refugees and the asylum process, which is a whole different discussion, right? But when we talk to individuals who obviously acquire permanent residence at some point, or citizenship by various means, birth or descent or otherwise, we need to talk to what is the criteria to become a citizen in South Africa as a basic framework of citizenship before one looks at immigration. So could you talk to the legal requirements for citizenship?
So there's three ways to obtain citizenship in South Africa. It's by birth. So that's if both your parents are obviously South African, you automatically gain citizenship. Or if one of your parents are South Africans. And the next way to obtain citizenship is through descent. That is if, for example, your parents have immigrated, but they are either one of them or both of them are South Africans, and you are born in Oz or in the UK or America, and you can obtain citizenship.
Or any other country.
Right? Any other country for that matter. This is obviously subject to being registered at either the High Commission or the government office, relevant government office. But then the last way to obtain citizenship in South Africa is through naturalization. That is, if you come to South Africa on any sort of visa that gives you the right to live or work here, and you've lived or worked here for 5 years, you apply for your citizenship,
the permanent residence,
permanent residency, and then your citizenship after 5 years. And as you know, that process can be a lot longer than 5 years.
Absolutely.
But that's the framework. It's either through birth, descendant as a descendant, or through naturalization.
But when you talk about individuals, and it's obviously a big media furor now, in my mind, it sounds very simplistic. If there's a challenge to someone who their citizenship is challenged, or the authenticity, at least, thereof. So if one looks at a broad framework, in my mind, besides an ID document, which sometimes, and that seems to be that the thrust of the conversations now, is the citizenship legally granted, is starting to look at a birth certificate. Is that correct?
So if we look at the issue around the Miss South African contestant, the problem there is that documents can be provided to a institution, for example, your workplace or well, Miss South Africa, and they've got very limited avenues to really check if it's an authentic document. And what happens a lot of times is that the documents are actually authentic, but these documents have been obtained through illegal means. So it's very, very difficult to ascertain whether the documents are authentic, but the process in which it was obtained was illegal. And that's very difficult to ascertain the real set of facts. And one has to go behind the curtain basically and look at home affairs and see what's going on at home affairs. Is there corruption? And as we know, there is corruption. Home affairs officials have been arrested for selling authentic IDs, but through illegal means, selling IDs for 10, 20,000 rand or work visas, etc. So that's where the problem comes in. And I think you have to look at the root cause. If you do not fix the root, then you can't fix it going up. And I mean, if we look at the the Miss SA contestant, everything might seem above board, but it's very difficult to ascertain whether her parents were in the country legally and if they were actually South African. As I understand it, her dad is a Nigerian, but her mom is South African. But it's very he says, she says in this situation. But one has really to look at where her papers and then try to trace it back. And then you can't just look at one person, you have to look at a person's parents as well. And in rare cases, maybe even grandparents and great grandparents. For example, my family history is my father's side is from Sweden, and we've got paperwork where my great grandmother was born in Malmo in Sweden. So if you can trace people back to as far as your great grandparents or even further, it's quite easy. But
Yes.
then again, it's very difficult in a country where corruption is rife to really trace the steps back and see, okay, this person was born here, the
Yes.
parents was born here, and then the great grandparents or grandparents were in South Africa.
Yes. But on the case in point now, if we talk to the Miss South Africa issue, she could either be a victim of her circumstance, which is very possible, or and this is my lay mind looking at the home affairs system, given that I've got some experience with it, is if one looks at, if they say, okay, it's an authentic ID document, but to support that, you can then produce your unabridged birth certificate saying who are the parents, because some of the conversations now center on, they say her mother's South African, others say her mother's Mozambican. A Twitter thread that I followed just this morning was saying, well, the contestant claims to have been brought up in Soweto, but 2 months ago, a school in Cape Town congratulated her as a school graduate to say, you passed out from our school and you've now made the top 16 from South Africa. So even the history of where she's from, I think what's creating a lot of concern is her lack of ability or lack of willingness, either advised or not, of not coming to the fore and saying, here's my ID document, here's my birth certificate, here's where I grew up, and hey, here's my mom, and here's my dad. But now there's interviews who say, well, the father came in 2010, and only after the interview happened, and when it contradicted her narrative, she says, well, that's not my father. Great. So where is your father? Where is your mother? Because if your mother allegedly lives in the country, as she says, which is not disputed at this point, if she is South African or not, is the dispute, where is she? Bring your mom to the fore, show us your birth certificate, or show the public your birth certificate, because you intent again, and that's what, there's a mix of the conversation. I don't think it's a xenophobic discussion. It's a discussion of you want to be an ambassador to represent South Africa on an international stage. We need to validly find out if you're South African and have the ability to do so, right?
So I think definitely she's a victim of her circumstances. I think she didn't have any control of her situation, which is sad on her part. But also, like you say, if you place in that situation, come forward and say, these are the documents that were given to me as a
Yes.
child and that I've grown up with, and these are the documents of my parents. And take it public and say, this is a real set of facts, because at the moment, she's being abused in the press, abused on social media, and I don't think it's good for her or for the competition. And it's also puts a bad light on the xenophobic issue in South Africa, where people point fingers and say these people try to come into our competition, and they try to win it, because it's a pride moment for South Africa. It's Miss SA, it's a big
Yes.
competition. And it's the best situation or plan for her is to come forward and provide documentation, even if the documents might, like I said earlier, might not have been obtained by legal means, but the documents are real saying, this is what I've been given, this is what I have, and then for the proper authorities to say, and comment on that. And the proper authorities to comment on that is actually only Home Affairs.
Yes.
Miss SA can't really say, they're happy with it. Any minister or politician can't say, they're happy with it.
Yes.
It's actually just Home Affairs that can say, we verified the identity and the records of the parents and of her, and we satisfied that she cannot compete or that she cannot compete.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the press is like that, they'll speculate, but until that happens, there will be speculation.
And this verification is not difficult. As you know, I've got family experience with that, is when you apply for a renewal of a document or verification of the document, it's done on the same day. I've been at Home Affairs where a family member has stood in a queue and they say, well, you want to renew it, great. But before we accept it, you've got to go to the verifications desk. And in times it took half an hour to authenticate the document and say, well, this document's valid, you can proceed with the application. So let's assume, and there are some now discussions saying, well, if she shares the documents, it's against the Poppy Act and all of that. But we're talking a public platform. The discussion's out there in the public domain. At best, go to the Director General at Home Affairs or go to the new minister who seems to love the limelight on the great work he's doing, which is fantastic. But to go to the minister, say, Minister, you and the department can interrogate these documents and you can make an official statement of the authenticity of this and we can put an end to this conversation. Because the custodian of that citizenship process is the Department of Home Affairs. In an ideal world, that sounds realistic. Or am I missing something?
I agree. That's the only logical way I see it to go forward and to put the issue to bed, essentially, because this will cause problems until it's sorted out, basically. If she places in Miss SA, it will be in the news.
Yes.
If she falls out, it will be in the news. If she wins, it will be even bigger news.
Yeah.
So for her sake, and I think for the competition's sake, the only way forward is to go to the minister and get an official press release saying that we've authenticated these documents and everything on our side is perfect. And obviously, she'll still have people saying they don't agree. That's life, but the proper channels has to be followed. And obviously, if the proper channels are followed in this instance, there's enough limelight on the issue that I believe there won't be any corruption in the process. And it's sad that the country has come to the stage where we fight about that, because we think about, a birth is a wonderful thing. It's a new family member. You register your child as a South African, but then you find out it's so easy to buy an ID or to buy a passport, that, you don't necessarily work for citizenship. Is something you're proud of that you get automatically. But now you're a South African citizen by birth, your parents are South African, and now you sit at home, see someone coming in, buying an ID for 10,000 Rand, and they continue going on. And there's so many instances like that, and there's no way for the general public to check that. And that's why the only way to go is Home Affairs. And the unfortunate situation is also that if people continue to approach Home Affairs to see, is my employee that I've just appointed legally here, I want to check his documents, it inundates them with even more work, and they're already overworked. It takes them months to print a simple ID. It takes them months to do a passport application for foreigners, and that affects in foreign investment and business as well.
Yes. Now, from a business perspective, if we step away from the South Africa aspect, there are individuals who want to reside in South Africa and hopefully at some point become citizens because they either bring in their retirement or they've come on a business visa, then obtained permanent residence and now want to obtain citizenship. I strongly believe there's a strong case to be made of saying there's economic benefit of fixing the system. But it doesn't look like there's a clear picture of what Home Affairs plans to do with this process to clean up that process, they have a biometric system, but to have it actually work in an effective process. What are your thoughts from the business impact of this citizenship and permanent residence debacle that we find ourselves in?
So I think South Africa has so many incentives for people to invest and retire. And even if they retire here, they're bringing all their retirement savings. So it's a big business opportunity for the country because we've got such a beautiful country. People love to retire by the sea. The weather's perfect. Things are for certain foreigners, it's very cheap to come and retire here.
Yes.
But those foreigners are driven away by the stumbling blocks they find with visa applications. Obviously, as you know, when traveling, that's your first point of call is sort my visa out, then I can book my flight tickets and accommodation and whatever comes with that. But once these people start with the process and they see it's too difficult, they'd rather decide and go to another country that offers them easier access with the same perks.
Yes.
And that, I believe, drives away foreign investment and business and huge sums of money because of this unwillingness by the Home Affairs to sort it out. It seems. I think we're losing billions, if not even more than that, every year to people deciding, you know what, it's not worth it waiting 2 years for my papers to be sorted out. I want to retire now. I'd rather go to the Caymans or somewhere in the Mediterranean, which is it's a similar weather situation, and it's just as cheap, and I'll go live there.
Yeah.
I think for some people, maybe expats, it's different because this is their home. They were born here, so they'll
Yes.
stick it out. But if we want to bring in people that have no connection to South Africa, they might have visited it once or twice, or it's a destination close to their heart because they might have gotten engaged here, or this was their first overseas trip. We need to give them an incentive saying, we want you here, we're going to give you an easy process and a legal process. Obviously, we don't want any illegalities to come in, but a quicker process to incentivize the people saying, we've got the easiest retirement visas, we've got the easiest business visas, bring your money, come and live here, come and retire here, come and invest your money here.
Yes.
And that essentially will give the economy a boost, and it'll give smaller towns a boost as well. If you look at popular retirement towns like Hermanus, St. Francis, places like Durban, Umhlanga, Umhloti, Ballito, and that'll give them a massive boost. And also places up north in Limpopo, smaller places, people love the bush. Parks like the Kruger National Park and other elephant park are huge attractions for foreigners. And if more investment can be put to places like that through better processes regarding business visas and retirement visas, I think there'll be a big increase in jobs and also in foreign investment coming into South Africa through various means.
I can tell you in a personal experience with a very close relative, is the couple got married and obviously to a legal South African citizen. And when they issued a spouse visa to the wife, she was given a spouse visa to say you're permitted to reside in the country, not permitted to work. She waited 5 years to apply for her permanent residence. It took another 4.5 years and 2 high court cases for her to finally get her permanent residence. But for 9 economic years as an auditor, the Home Affairs temporary spousal visa, as they call it, for 9 years, she couldn't legally work in the country to contribute economically in the country with postgraduate qualifications, with an MBA, being an auditor. She couldn't contribute to the country. And when she had approached Home Affairs to say, but I want to work, whilst you're taking 4 or 5, this extended period to deal with my PR, I need to be a contributor, firstly to my family, and then to the larger economic system. And Home Affairs' answer through their agent VFS was, well then, bring an application to cancel your current visa, leave the country, apply for a work visa. She said, but I am a spouse. I'm legally on one. You need to remove the condition. And Home Affairs says, we're not sure what to do with you. We'll wait it out. But almost a decade for Home Affairs to clean up its own act on a legal, transparent application that they could verify, because they issued at least 4, if not 5, spousal visas in the entire process. Do you think something can be optimized, at least for legal applications in South Africa?
So in that situation, I think the not allowing someone to work because they're a spouse is completely unconstitutional. Because the Constitution does not only protect South African citizens, it protects anyone in South Africa, regardless of their citizenship. So in that sense, I think we need to align ourselves with international practice. If I take the UK, for example, if you get a 5-year workers visa there and you take your spouse with you, your spouse is also entitled to work,
Wow.
even though you are not a citizen of the UK. And essentially, we need to align ourselves with that, saying that your spouse is here with you, you are here legally, we are going to allow your spouse to work as well. There are certain restrictions that we may be able to impose. For example, you can't be a legal practitioner, as you know. You can't be an attorney or an advocate in South Africa if you're not a permanent resident or citizen. But there's a lot of other jobs these people can do and contribute. And people complain that there's a brain drain in South Africa. But if we can place some of those experts that we lose with experts that come in, for example, your neurosurgeons, your auditors, for example, it will bring in knowledge from overseas that we might not necessarily have here, and bring in processes that we might not implement here. And that's on ground level. But I think if Home Affairs needs to align their system with international practice and practicality as well. You can't allow someone's spouse not to work in a situation like that. It's just not practical and it's not logical.
And not even at a macro level, Gustav, at a very fundamental level. The husband has to be the sole provider for a decade. It impacts the family dynamics. It affects their own quality of life and the opportunities they have. Because if somebody's gainfully employed for, I'm not sure what an auditor earns these days, but it's reasonably good income, you could then augment that family income and their lifestyle. But for a decade, for them to say, well, if we catch you working, it's illegal, on what basis could you do that? But the difficulty is trying to talk to Home Affairs, and I'm well aware of the case. You don't get a direct answer from anyone, because if you talk to Home Affairs about an application, they defer their decision-making to VFS, which is their processing agent. And if you talk to VFS, they say, well, the departments must decide. So you've got a sort of push and pull of saying, well, who actually runs Home Affairs?
In this situation, it's a international practice to outsource stuff like that. A lot of people do it in South Africa. If you apply for a visa to America, you don't really deal with the embassy, you deal with an agent, because it's just practically easier. However, it's difficult in that situation because they're making an administrative decision that's reviewable in court. Yes. And who are you actually going to take to court? Are you going to take VFS to court, which is actually not the Minister of Home Affairs? It's just an agent. It's a business, basically. Yes. They're in it to make money. Or are you going to take the Minister of Home Affairs to court, which actually didn't make the decision? It's very difficult. And I understand that they need to streamline their processes and outsource in certain instances because they are overworked. But there needs to be a set of rules or code of conduct between the two parties saying, if this is the situation, this is how we deal with it. And it seems like that is where there's the problem, is there's no system in place to deal with problems that may arise. It's a sort of, we'll deal with it when we get to it, and every situation we'll deal with differently. And that scares away foreign investment and retirement investment. And it's unfortunate because we've got so much potential in the country, and it's simple things that they can fix. It'll take them a week, for example, just to set out a document to say, okay, if there's a dispute regarding something that VFS did, this is how we're going to deal with it. Yes. If there's a dispute with something that's between Home Affairs and VFS, this is how we're going to deal with it. And obviously then, it might cause even more conflict between the two parties. It might even lead to them cancelling the contract. But then there's at least steps that the people inside Home Affairs know what to do, and the people outside Home Affairs, the people looking in, people applying for visas, people applying for permanent residency visas, they know the steps. Because as it is now, it's more of a, we'll take it on a case-by-case basis. Yes. And that's also unequal. Every person gets treated differently. Absolutely. Which is not right. And, a certain person might be able to get their visa within a year and another person in 10 years, which is completely wrong, and it's not according to what our constitution says.
Absolutely. So in summarizing, the citizenship regulations and legislation are quite clear. The administrative processes are theoretically very clear in what can and shouldn't be done. But when one looks at the implementation and the dispute currently going on in South Africa about validity of citizenship, as well as birth by the various 3 or 4 criteria, one has to really apply their mind and ask, if an individual is impacted on a particular national and potentially a global stage, where does the responsibility of that individual lie?